Alright, baseball fans, there's a debate that has been simmering in Major League Baseball for years now. One that seems to heat up every time a controversial call, or perhaps more accurately, a series of controversial calls, impacts a game. It's the debate about the human element versus technology, specifically at the plate, and after a recent game. The calls for implementing the automated ball strike system, or ABS, sometimes called robot umpires, are mounting louder than ever. That's because a veteran umpire had what can only be described as a dreadful performance behind the plate in a recent game. And thanks to the increasing availability of data, that performance is being put on full, embarrassing display. The game in question was played on Wednesday afternoon between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Atlanta Braves. The home plate umpire for that game was Stu Scheurwater, a veteran with years of experience in the league. But according to the popular X, formerly Twitter, account, Umpire Auditor, which meticulously tracks and grades umpire performance pitch by pitch, Scheurwater had an absolute nightmare behind the plate. Umpire Auditor found that Stu Scheurwater missed a staggering 19 calls in that single game. Let that number sink in for a moment. 19 missed balls or strikes over the course of one game, when you consider there were only 275 pitches thrown in total. That means Scheurwater missed calls on nearly 14.5% of all pitches. That's roughly 1 in every 7 pitches being called incorrectly by the umpire. Adding insult to injury, at least for one team. Umpire Auditor's data showed that roughly 74% of those 19 missed calls went against the visiting St. Louis Cardinals. So, not only were there a high number of incorrect calls, but they seemed to be significantly biased against one specific team in the matchup. In terms of the game's outcome, the Cardinals held a slim 1-0 lead through 6 innings. However, the Braves managed to tie the game in the 7th inning and then added 3 more runs in the 8th, ultimately holding on for a 4-1 victory. While you can't definitively say the missed calls were the sole reason the Cardinals lost, it's undeniable that errors on nearly 15% of pitches, with a significant lean against them, can absolutely influence momentum, pitch counts, and key moments in a tight game. This kind of performance, quantified and shared publicly by accounts like Umpire Auditor, provides significant ammunition for those who want to see human umpires replaced by technology. It fuels the argument that the level of human error is simply too high and too impactful on the outcome of professional games. And the reaction on social media from fans and observers was swift and unsurprised, filled with frustration and renewed calls for change. Quotes from X users reflected the sentiment. One user wrote, "If he missed that many calls, he should be sent to AAA, drawing a parallel to how struggling players get demoted." They added, "Sure, the union doesn't allow that. Otherwise, go electronic." Another user demanded more accountability for umpires, suggesting, "Fine them if they miss over a certain amount of calls a game." NBA writer Tony Mejia chimed in with a sarcastic jab at baseball purists who resist change, tweeting, "But the purists want to keep human error in the mix, yikes." This recent game wasn't an isolated incident either. It seems to be part of a trend that's been highlighted more frequently in recent weeks. Precisely because of accounts like Umpire Auditor sharing the raw data. Just the Friday before Stu Scheurwater's game, crew chief Chris Conroy missed an even higher number 24 calls, in a game between the Cleveland Guardians and Pittsburgh Pirates, marking the most missed calls by any umpire this season. Another umpire, John Bacon, also drew attention earlier in April after missing 17 calls in a Blue Jays-Orioles game. And just 4 days later, that same umpire, John Bacon, was involved in a controversial ejection, tossing New York Yankees second baseman Jazz Chisholm Jr. after a called strike 3 that replays suggested was likely a ball. These repeated instances of high numbers of missed calls, some leading to controversial ejections or potentially influencing game outcomes, or leading fans to openly question the state of umpiring. One ex-user asked a question that many are likely wondering. Are these guys missing more calls this season than ever, or are we paying more attention to it being that the challenge system is looming? They added, "It feels like this year's umps are incompetent as all hell." That's the core of the issue and the accelerating debate. Are umpires genuinely performing worse? Or is the combination of readily available, detailed pitch tracking data from sources like Umpire Auditor, coupled with the ongoing discussion and looming possibility of AB's implementation, simply shining a brighter, more critical light on errors that have always been present? Regardless of the reason, the visibility of these missed calls is undeniable. Dreadful performances like the 19 missed calls by Stu Scheurwater in a single game provide significant, quantifiable evidence for those advocating for the automated ball strike system. They argue that while the human element is part of baseball's tradition, accuracy and fairness at the highest level should take precedence. The calls for greater umpire accountability, whether through public grading, fines, or alternative assignments for poor performance, are growing louder from a fanbase armed with data and frustrated by errors that seem to directly impact the games they watch. As the season continues and technology allows for instantaneous, objective analysis of every single pitch, the pressure on Major League Baseball to address umpire performance and potentially consider larger technological changes like ABs is only going to intensify. The debate between preserving the human element and ensuring the integrity of the strike zone is far from over. Alright, let's talk about something that's been a constant source of debate in Major League Baseball, and a recent game has just added a ton of fuel to the fire: the performance of human umpires and the push for an electronic strike zone. In a game on Wednesday between the St. Louis Cardinals and the Atlanta Braves, veteran umpire Stu Scheurwater had what's being called a dreadful performance behind the plate. According to data tracked by accounts like Umpire Auditor, Scheurwater missed an incredible 19 calls in that single game. To make matters worse, roughly 74% of those missed calls went against the visiting St. Louis Cardinals. That means he missed calls on nearly 14.5% of all the pitches thrown in that game. The Braves ended up winning the game 4-1, but the focus quickly shifted to the umpiring. This kind of performance is exactly what leads to the mounting calls for more umpire accountability and, ultimately, for MLB to implement the automated ball strike system, or ABS. You see reactions all over social media from frustrated fans demanding umpires like this be sent down to AAA, or fined if they miss too many calls. And this isn't just one isolated incident this season. The article mentions other recent games where umpires have missed a high number of calls as well, like a crew chief missing 24 calls in a game or another umpire missing 17 and then controversially ejecting a player days later. It raises the question that the article touches on: are umpires actually missing more calls this season? Or are we just paying more attention to it now because of the data that's readily available from sources like Umpire Auditor, and because the possibility of an electronic strike zone, or at least a challenge system, is looming closer? Regardless of whether the accuracy is getting worse or our awareness is just getting better, performances like missing 19 calls in one game are hard to defend. They highlight the inherent inconsistency and human error in the strike zone. Incidents like this are only going to make the calls for greater accountability, or the eventual transition to an electronic strike zone, louder and louder in Major League Baseball.